Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Bradley Wolfe, and I'm going over Chapter 6 in Communication in the Real World. Again, this version is by James Madison University. And this chapter is on media, technology, and communication. It's one of the shorter chapters in the book. It has some key points, very broadly speaking, about media, technology, and communication. I also teach a kind of a media and society class that goes a lot more depth. So certainly there's way more here than what's been covered, but just some key points here. It starts with the internet and digital media. Um, so it so it frames the internet and digital media age beginning in 1990 and continues to today. I was born in 1992, so I grew up kind of as the internet was developing as well. So it's interesting to see how the internet is today versus way back when I was younger. Certainly, there's a lot of differences. I remember from a working class family. I remember going to the library in order to use a computer, which some families still do today. But we didn't have a home computer. We didn't have home internet until later. As we kind of grew up, we had one family computer, and nowadays it seems like every kid has a phone, has a tablet, a laptop, very connected to technology. But certainly that's changed over time as access to technology has grown. So has the internet. So has that digital space. So it was one of the key points here in the textbook is saying that a lot of the internet is user generated content. So before the mass media was, the creators, um, the news companies, newspapers, it was back to print, then radio. Oh, you had to own a radio station to kind of get your message out. Then television stations, right? It was very controlled. Who was creating the messages and who had that creative power. But now anyone can create content just on social media, posting something on social media, video on TikTok can go viral. Certainly, people use Snapchat and Twitter or X, Facebook, many other platforms are used. Some of them have wide audiences, right? You can gain a following on YouTube, but certainly in other platforms, you may just be connected to your family or friends. You may have a Discord channel where you're just people who play video games together, and they may have a channel for them to collaborate. Variety of ways to communicate online with the internet. It changes things. It changes how we view things. And certainly, it talks a little bit about online advertising here as well. Sometimes those cookies in your computer will give you targeted ads based on your interest, based on what other websites you visited. Sometimes I feel like the phone listens to what I say. I talk about something and then I'm seeing ads for it. So some people say that's conspiracy theory. I think there's some truth to it in terms of what's been found, but maybe it's again what I'm searching or something else. But certainly, uh, a lot of that very catered, specific advertising to the individual. When we look at the media, there's also representation. So this isn't just the internet, but more broadly speaking, in terms of TV shows, in terms of movies, who is represented and how are they represented? So it talks a lot. The FCC had this fairness doctrine that was established in 1949 and it lasted until the early 80s. And there were proponents of media deregulation saying, hey, if one media company controls all these different stations, then they control the message. And they say we want to deregulate, allow some smaller channels to compete, smaller radio stations, smaller newspapers to allow them to have a platform as well. And then there's going to be more diversity in the media and maybe some better representation. So scholars, a lot of research and communication and media studies talks about how minority groups are represented on television, and certainly that is growing. Again, back when I was younger, there wasn't any LGBT people on television, really. There was some Will and Grace was one of the first shows with regular representation. Ellen, when she came out, that was a whole big deal because back then people weren't accepting of the LGBTQ community. And now today it's changed so much. It has much more representation. It's much more acceptable for people to be out and, be themselves on TV. And so there's been growing representation there. But we see other minority groups as well based on racial, ethnic groups, religious groups that may or may not be represented in the media. And it takes a while sometimes for those characters to catch on. Maybe they're, a popular show within that community, but it doesn't reach the wider audience. So who's being represented and how are they being represented and who's controlling the stories? So even behind the scenes, sometimes there have been TV shows that have been praised for having good, diverse representation on screen. but the story, the narrative, was controlled by often people from a different demographic background, often white people, are writing the stories, or the writers and producers, um, even when they're on stage. And so again, looking at how representation changes, and over time, how it's continuing to change and develop, is something to think about. You also may look at your own media consuming habits and saying, hey, how is this group represented in the media that I consume, or are they even represented? Maybe I don't see anyone who's Muslim on television. So where am I getting my news stories? Do I know Muslim people? Am I seeing them in TV shows represented as regular characters, or am I just hearing news stories about that group? Because often there's a lot of association in news stories between Muslims and terrorist groups in the Middle East. But Muslims in the United States are overwhelmingly not terrorists, right? They're not associated with those terrorist groups by any means, but their stories aren't necessarily represented, and so it's hard to build connections across those differences when you don't have that common ground. So maybe getting to know people in the community is often helpful, but there are other ways of, again, if we look at intercultural communication to build those connections, reading stories, again, watching TV, consuming media from those stories can help you start to understand those differences. Maybe if there's a group that you're not as familiar with, you can get familiar with them in some way. So social learning theory, or communication theory, claims that media portrayals influence our development of schemata or scripts, especially as children, about different groups of people. So we're learning, using media to learn about these different groups of people, kind of what I was saying. So a person who may grow up in a relatively homogeneous white middle-class environment can develop and learn about African Americans and Latinos based on how they're depicted in media messages. But if they're pattern representation, if it's based on stereotypes, if it's negative representation, it may not be the best, way of learning about those groups of people. So this is why there's some advocacy for diverse representation in the media and allowing different groups to be represented. And it also says here another example is blue collar workers. So again, race, religion, sexual orientation. Blue collar workers make up a big proportion of our population, but they're not always portrayed on television. So we look at those working class. How do people know about working class communities? Often there is some misunderstanding of people of working class backgrounds, or even rural backgrounds, who may not be represented as well. A lot of TV shows take place in bigger cities. So what do people who live in those bigger cities, how do they understand rural communities? That's another thing when we're looking at representation in the media. So this next section, media literacy, it talks a little bit about those representation in the media, but this is also about kind of reading news sources, so being able to critique and analyze the impact of media. So certainly we can analyze the impact of stereotype character on people's development and understanding of that group of people. But this is also about news stories, right? There's been a lot about in politics in the United States with fake news, right? Oh, that's fake news. Well, media literacy helps you understand whether or not something is fake news. And I've done some assignments, especially in my mass communication class, and students aren't very good at determining whether or not something is real or fake. I'll have some fake news articles or real news articles, and sometimes it's hard to distinguish between them. And that's because these fake news articles are like really well done, right? They put a lot of effort into creating the fake news. They may make up fake citations, fake sources, provide very detailed descriptions. So it sounds real. It sounds like there's some truth to it, even if it is fake, even if it is a false narrative. Then we talk about the user-generated content of the media, especially with TikTok videos. A TikTok video can go viral, and it doesn't, right? That doesn't mean it's true. My daughter loves showing me TikTok videos and saying, "Oh yeah, look what this person said. It must be true. It's on TikTok." They're saying I did my research, I did sources. That's what the people in the video say. Well, what sources, right? I don't know, right? So I don't know if it's true or false. And so this isn't like a left or right issue in terms of politics. Certainly there's misinformation on both sides. But that's why you need to be a critical consumer of content in order to understand whether or not something is telling the truth, or saying, hey, maybe I need to look at a few different sources. And the few different sources may need to critically engage with each other, because sometimes the same fake news will be spread across channels, especially if there's a conglomerate of sources that all are in the same space, in the same silo. They may be repeating what each other says, and not, I've read in 3 sources. That still doesn't mean it's true. So we need to be media literate, especially with the internet, especially with this huge amount of information that's online. We need to be able to be a critical analyst, of what we're consuming. So media literacy is not meant to censor or blame the media, nor does it advocate for us to limit or change our engagement with media in any particular way. It's more about those critical thinking and listening skills. How do we understand what we consume through the media? So it's again using those critical thinking skills and saying, hey, just because I heard this doesn't mean it's necessarily true. And so sometimes I'll be in a conversation, in an interpersonal conversation with someone, and I'll repeat something that I found online. The other person challenges me, and they say, hey, I don't think that's true. And then I often think to myself, where did I hear that? Was my source accurate? And then I'll write it. Being willing to say, hey, I might be wrong. I may have gotten bad information. I think that's a super important skill to have in today's society that not a lot of people do. They write, oh, I want to win this argument. I heard this, it must be true. This is what I believe. I could be wrong, right? I'm a very educated person. I have a doctorate, I have multiple master's degrees, but I could be wrong, right? I may not have looked into this information as well as I could have. I may have just heard something and assumed it to be accurate. So again, so being willing to admit, hey, I could be wrong. That's an important skill to have. And this source could be wrong, even though it may be a source that I trust, that I normally is accurate, that I listen to often. It still could be wrong. And so that's part of that critical thinking, having that opportunity to critically analyze and not just accept something to be the truth. So there's some standard questions that you can ask yourself to help you get started with media criticism and analysis. And it says there are no true or right or wrong answers during the critical thinking process. It's just about expanding your understanding and perspective rather than arriving at a definitive answer. So questions that the textbook asks: who created this message? What did they hope to accomplish? And what are their primary belief systems? So sometimes I may be listening to the news, I may listen to NPR, and I can say, hey, the NPR created this message. They're more of a liberal news source, so I know they're coming at it from that perspective. And I can think about what did they hope to accomplish by sharing this information. Number two, the second prompt here, what is my interpretation of this message? How and why might different people understand the message differently than me? And what can I learn about myself based on the interpretation, and how might my interpretation be different from others? And so this, when we look at chapter 1 and those models of communication, there's the encoding process where the message is created, and it can be created through mass media channels. And then there's the decoding process. So how do I as an individual interpret this message? Some people may interpret it and agree with it and be very strongly in favor. Oh, yes, this is right. This is the truth. Other people may say, go to that same message and say, oh, this is so problematic. I don't like how they're framing this. It's so biased, right? So what does it say about me and how I interpret the message, right? We can learn about ourselves that way. We can learn about some belief systems that we may have, some biases we may have, and just being willing to challenge ourselves and understand that the same message may be interpreted differently by different people. So we can have the same facts, the same statistics, and come to different conclusions. And so I think that's also helpful for interpersonal conversations. If we're arguing with someone, we may have the exact same information, but based on our experiences, based on the biases we may have, our understanding of the world and how things work, we may look at the same facts and come to different conclusions. And that's important to take into consideration as well. You may even think of that in a workplace. If one person works in sales and one person works in finance, they may use their hat that they're wearing in the workplace, the role that they have in that organization, to view what's going on and interpret things differently. So number 3 here, again, trying to get back to media literacy. What lifestyles, values, and points of view are represented or omitted in this message? What does this tell me about how other people live and believe? Does this message leave anything out, or anything or anyone out? So one of the things that I've had to do to challenge myself is that after a while, I noticed when I tried to be more of a critical consumer of the media, I noticed a lot of the shows that I watched had white male protagonists. I'm a white man. I was listening to stories that I could relate to. So that, right, it made sense to me. But I'm like, okay, well, why don't I have women of color as the protagonist or the main character in these shows? So I sought out some more diverse media, looking at different stories. They can be very enjoyable, right? I challenge myself to watch different things. I like comedies. So often then I'll find comedies that may have a cast of a different racial background or a cast of a different location, right? Try and find something else to expand my worldview and say, hey, who created this message? So maybe a movie, maybe a TV show, but looking whose stories are being left out here, and then how can I find those stories? Where can I seek them out? And so sometimes that may be, again, and to get to having a whole television show or movie produced, that is a whole, that's a big adventure, right? To get there. I mean, that takes a lot of work. It needs to go through multiple channels of approval. You may be able to find, books that get published. Books are easier to get published and reach maybe a smaller audience. You could watch sometimes YouTube videos or content creators on social media, on TikTok, and making sure you have diverse representation there. There's a lot of ways to get exposed to different viewpoints and saying, hey, who's being left out of the stories? Whose stories don't I see? So I like using TED Talks a lot when I'm teaching, because I can find TED Talks of people of very diverse backgrounds, of different viewpoints, sharing messages about their life that I think a lot of people can resonate with. So again, seeking out those different stories and seeing how can we connect ourselves with them, and how can they resonate with us. So number 4, why was this message sent? Who sent it? Is it trying to tell me something or to sell me something, right? So sometimes in an online space, there's advertisements, lots and lots of advertisements trying to sell you something. There could be product placement trying to sell you something. But again, trying to say, why was this message sent? Who sent it? Where is it coming from? So trying to discern that as well. So we can look at that in terms of sales and advertising. Again, product placement, even in like YouTube, TikTok. If you have a big following on YouTube or TikTok, you could get sponsors, and those sponsors could encourage product placement or other ways of mentioning their products online. But in terms of political messaging as well, it can go through a lot of different channels in order to get to you, in order to convey a specific message. So again, looking at that, who's sending it, where did it come from? And it could be reported by the news. It could go through multiple sources to get to you. So where did it originate? So sometimes I like, especially with misinformation, using Snopes or some other fact-checking site, which will do the investigation for you of where this message came from. Hey, where did this fake news originate? Kind of why was it being sent out? Where can we find the origin of the story? And they do a pretty good job investigating those. Certainly not everyone has time to do that. I don't have time to investigate every message that I'm receiving. We receive messages all the time from the media. I've sometimes in my classes done a unplugged project where you get rid of your phone, your laptop for 24 hours, right? No TV, no laptop, no phone. But even like going to the mall, students would write about in the reflection, I couldn't avoid media. I go to the mall, there's TV screens blasting at me, there's music playing. So it's very hard to avoid media, even if we're consciously trying to. So if you ask these questions, there are plenty of other questions you can ask. Media literate people should be able to use well-reasoned arguments and evidence, not just opinions, to support their evaluations. And people with media literacy skills also know that their evaluations may not be definitive, right? It's not like, oh, I'm media literate, so therefore this is true, right? I know it's true. You don't. You never exactly know it's true. But you may have reasons why you can and say, hey, I looked at this message, I evaluated it, and this is the conclusion I came to based on that. But again, being able to still be open to further critical analysis is a helpful skill to have. So just being open-minded and hearing other perspectives can be helpful. So the last section in this chapter is on social media. So mass media and media have long been discussed as a unifying force. So and online media in particular has been characterized by its connectivity. So oftentimes people will build deep, genuine relationships online. There are many gaming communities where they don't ever even meet each other in person, but they still have very deep connections. I played this game called Forge of Empires for a while, and I had this group of people I played with. We were in a team. I forget what they called it. But I was one year I was fundraising for suicide prevention, and I posted on my Facebook where people I know in person, family, friends. I didn't get a lot of donations, and I'm like, hey, let me just post it to this Forge of Empires team, whatever, right? I don't know them very well. It's just some online people. They donated more money than my real life and friends. I'm like, really? And because we built those connections with each other in the online space. And certainly, people have very real, deep, meaningful connections that can be built online. There's online dating. That's the whole thing, using apps and other ways to build connections with other people. And those connections can definitely be real. They can move to in-person relationships that are very meaningful, and they can stay online. You can have very online friendships, relationships that create meaning and value in your life, in a person's life, definitely. So again, talking about social media, so there's sometimes large audience that are connected to the same radio, television, broadcast, newspaper, story, book, or movie in a one-way communication channel, set from one place to many. And sometimes mass media outlets allow people to maybe write into the news or get feedback in some way. So there's definitely that feedback loop. But with the internet, it connects individuals all over. Everything is crisscrossing all over the place. So we may not have the same experience. When back in the day, there may have just been a few channels, so everyone would watch the same show at the same time. across the country. Whereas here, everyone's looking at different channels, right? Sometimes people are watching stuff on. I had a relative who was over at my house the other day, and she loves Wheel of Fortune. So for her, Wheel of Fortune is on at the same time, Monday through Friday. She knows, I think it's like 6 p.m. Wheel of Fortune's on. So she's over at my house. She's 90 something. She's like, okay, I want to watch Wheel of Fortune. I don't have cable at my house, right? I don't. I just use online streaming platforms. We were able to find her an online streaming platform that had Wheel of Fortune, like old episodes of it. So we just put that on for her, and right, she's like, "No, where's my Wheel of Fortune? Where's my Wheel of Fortune?" She has a little bit of memory loss issues, but we got the Wheel of Fortune on, and then because it was streaming, it just like played one episode after another. So she just, oh, cool, it keeps. She was very excited and happy because she's like, she uses Wheel of Fortune. It helps her keep her memory sharp as sharp as it can be when you're 95 years old. So she was so happy that she got seeing episode after episode after episode. We eventually had to turn it off at the end of an episode before the next one played because otherwise she wouldn't leave. She's like, "No, Wheel of Fortune's on. I'm going to sit here and watch it." It's like, right. So back in the day, everyone used to watch the same thing at the same time, and that used to connect people. But here with the internet, people are can stream things at any time, in any location. They can watch on their laptop, on their phone, and whenever, wherever. You can listen to radio stations. Before you had to listen to your local radio stations. Now with online radio, you can just stream music if you don't even want a radio station, or you can listen to a radio station online. It talks about how tweets you can instantly connect with millions of people with one tweet in a small amount of time. So again, it's changed a lot. It's changed a lot, and again, this textbook doesn't go into tons of depth. Certainly, we could have an entire class on social media, and social media changes every few months. There's something new development in social media. So it talks about there have been different platforms and websites such as Napster, Flickr, YouTube, Wikipedia that have encouraged user-generated content. It changes. What's the most popular sites of today? Some have some staying power and stick around for a while. Some come and go. Certainly, there was MySpace. It was very popular for a while. Facebook has stayed around a little bit longer. So it talks about different social networking sites to have either a public or a semi-public platform, create networks and connections with other people, view people's profiles and connections. Such as there's LinkedIn for more professional ones. Again, talks about Facebook, and there's Twitter/X or whatever you want to call it. I'm old. I like calling it Twitter. But again, you can connect with each other on social media. And again, all these communication theories throughout this textbook can be applied in an online space. And I think that's one of the reasons they have this chapter shorter in this version of the book. There's other books that have much longer content on it, is because, we use technology so much with our communication in today's world that all these other theories have to be related. How do we use interpersonal skills, listening skills online, or, through text messages? How are we listening? How are we nonverbally communicating, in an online space? Certainly there's video chats and other ways to connect with people. And how does that change our communication if you use a video chat versus a phone call versus a text message? So technology is ever present in our world. And I don't think that's going to change. So this chapter is very short on media technology and communication, but it has very broad applications. Certainly you can study this more in depth, but the issues related to technology is spread throughout every single topic that's covered within this textbook. So thank you for watching. Again, a short overview of media technology and communication. I think the big things are to think about is to take away is about kind of the internet and how the internet has changed communication, how social media has changed communication, and then how can you be a critical consumer of content? Use those critical thinking skills, critical media literacy skills in order to take in all the information, listen to that information that you're consuming through the media. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. But otherwise, take care, and I hope you enjoyed the video.